There was a certain kind of cold in Portland that settled under the skin, the kind that made each breath a challenge and every step feel heavier than the last. Snow dusted the city in an unfamiliar silence, blurring the usual sounds of traffic and people, softening the sharpness of concrete corners. For Clara, 16 and officially out of places to go, the cold was just another thing to fight through. Each night, she curled tighter against herself beneath her thin jacket, her back pressed against the wall of whatever alley or abandoned doorway she could find. She told herself every morning that she'd make it one more day. But tonight was colder, crueler somehow, and the city felt like it had shrunk, pushing everyone inside, leaving only ghosts out on the street. Behind the old feed store, in an alley where even the strays didn't linger long, Clara kicked through the crusted snow, hoping she might find a forgotten crate or a half-eaten sandwich. Instead, a sound stopped her, a thin, desperate whinny, so faint she almost thought she'd imagined it. She froze, listening. The sound came again, a shivering, shaky call, half hidden by the wind. Curiosity and caution warred inside her. But the whinny had sounded like need, and she knew what that felt like. She pressed deeper into the alley, boots crunching quietly. That's when she saw him. The horse was barely more than a shadow at first, black as the space between stars, ribs showing, steam rising faintly from his nostrils. His coat was patchy, matted with frost, and he was chained to a broken-down trailer that looked like it hadn't moved in years. His head hung low, breath misting, legs trembling. No hay, no water, nothing but cold and rust. Clara's heart lurched. She knew about being left behind, knew about hunger gnawing at the insides until all you could think about was when it might stop. But seeing it in another, especially in something so proud, so out of place as a horse, shook her. She stepped closer, arms raised, voice soft. "Hey, boy, or girl, I won't hurt you." The horse's ears flicked, but he didn't pull away. He just watched her, eyes big and wary, as if daring her to come closer. She dropped to a crouch, studying him. The chain around his neck was too tight. His hooves were cracked, ice clinging stubbornly to the edges. He could have run, she thought. Horses were born for running. But something had broken that instinct. Or maybe he just didn't have the strength left. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, voice catching. "Neither should I, but—" She trailed off, not knowing what she meant to say. A gust of wind stung her cheeks. Clara looked down at her jacket, thin and barely holding together at the seams. Without really thinking, she shrugged it off and crossed the last few feet. The horse didn't shy, didn't flinch, just shivered. She draped her jacket over his back, the only barrier she had against the cold. "There you go," she murmured. "That's better, right?" He didn't move. He just stood, his big eyes locked on hers, the chain jangling softly as he shifted. The silence between them was thick, but not empty. It felt like recognition, as if he understood, in some small way, that she'd given up her warmth for him. She fished a piece of bread from her pocket, torn and stale. She held it out, palm up. The horse sniffed, then took it carefully between his lips, chewing with slow gratitude. She stroked his neck, feeling the warmth there, the trembling effort it took for him just to stand. For a long moment, Clara just stayed like that, kneeling in the snow, sharing what little she had. Lights flickered from the far end of the alley, a passing car, maybe, or someone peering out a window. Clara ducked lower, pressing closer to the horse. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I won't let them take you, not tonight." The promise hung in the air, both of them knowing she couldn't really keep it, but needing to believe in something, if only for a few hours. As the city around them slipped further into the hush of midnight, Clara made a nest of cardboard boxes and old blankets near the trailer. She didn't care about the smell, didn't care about the cold biting her bare arms. All that mattered was the soft sound of the horse breathing beside her, the steady rise and fall that told her he was still fighting, too. She named him Ember in her mind, and for the small bit of heat he still clung to, and for the flicker of hope she felt for the first time in ages. She closed her eyes, pressing her hand against his side. "You and me," she whispered. "We're not going anywhere. Not yet." In the darkness, the horse shifted closer, his breath ruffling her hair. It felt like trust, or the beginning of it. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt a little less alone. The snow kept falling, quiet and steady, muffling the world. But in that alley, warmth spread slowly, a coat over a shivering back, a hand on a trembling side, two lost souls finding each other. In a world that kept pushing her away, Clara finally found something that couldn't walk off either. And as she drifted into a fragile sleep, she held on to that, an ember against the cold. Snow still blanketed Portland, but for Clara, mornings began to feel less empty now that she had a reason to get up. Each day, as soon as the sky hinted at gray, she crept back to the alley behind the feed store, arms tucked into her sleeves, face pink with cold. Sometimes she'd find Ember standing exactly where she'd left him, his eyes tracking her every move. Other times he'd be so still she'd panic, thinking maybe the night had been too much. But each time, the horse blinked, flicked an ear, and let out that faint whinny, a sound that was almost hopeful. Clara collected scraps anywhere she could, half-eaten apples from the market, bruised carrots from a dumpster, a crust of bread if she was lucky. She scrounged a battered bucket from the curb and filled it with melted snow, careful to set it within Ember's reach. Sometimes he licked her hands after, as if to say, "Thank you." She found herself talking to him, whispering the little nothings she'd never dared say to another soul, how the world looked cruel from down here, how she hated the cold, how sometimes she wished she could disappear. After a week, Clara noticed a change. Ember started to perk up when he saw her, even tossing his head in a tired but stubborn greeting. The first time she tried calling him Ember out loud, his ears shot forward and he let out a soft nicker. It made her grin for the first time in months. But not everything was getting better. The feed store's owner started noticing the trampled snow and the food wrappers, the empty bucket that kept showing up and then vanishing. Clara tried to stay out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment when the coast was clear before slipping down the alley, but her heart hammered every time she heard footsteps. One afternoon, she almost got caught, ducking behind a pile of pallets just as the owner came out, cursing at the mess. She held her breath as he scanned the lot, his eyes passing right over Ember as if the horse were invisible. That night, something changed. Clara had just fed Ember the last of her scavenged apple when a truck rumbled into the lot. Its headlights cut through the snow, painting everything in harsh white and shadow. She ducked behind the trailer, heart pounding. The owner climbed out, slamming his door, and stomped toward the horse. "What the hell, you dumb animal! Still here?" the man barked. He kicked at the snow near Ember's hooves. Ember shrank back, eyes wild, nostrils flaring. "I oughta just—" He reached for the chain, yanking it hard. Ember let out a panicked whinny, rearing back. The chain snapped free from the trailer with a metallic crack. Clara's mind raced. She wanted to scream, to run, to throw herself between them. But her legs felt glued to the ground. The man staggered backward, shouting curses. Ember, suddenly loose, spun around in a circle, unsure which way to go. In that frozen moment, their eyes met, Clara's and Ember's, and something wordless passed between them. Without thinking, Clara called out, "Come on, boy!" Her voice was sharp, trembling with fear, but full of hope. Ember took a shaky step toward her. Then another. The owner lunged, grabbing for the chain, but Ember sidestepped, moving toward Clara's voice, muscles tensing as he found his footing. "Don't let him get away, you stupid!" the man shouted, but Ember bolted. Not wild, not panicked, but focused, moving straight for Clara. She reached out, grabbing the broken end of the chain. "This way, Ember. Let's go. Let's go." She ducked through the alley, the horse at her side, his breath coming in steaming bursts. She expected him to balk at the narrowness of the path or the sharp corners, but he followed her without hesitation. The two burst out onto the sidewalk, almost colliding with a pair of startled teens who stared, mouths open. "Is that a horse?" one of them gaped. Clara ignored them, tugging Ember along, weaving through the slush and the scattered trash bins. The horse's hooves clopped on the pavement, echoing down the block. It felt like the whole world should have been staring, but most windows were shuttered, most doors closed tight against the cold. Still, a few faces peered out, eyes wide. A car honked, swerving around them. Someone shouted something Clara couldn't quite hear. Her heart was pounding, fear and exhilaration mixing inside her chest. She led Ember through back streets and alleys, darting across empty intersections, ducking under low-hanging fire escapes. The city seemed stranger now. Hostile, unpredictable, but somehow alive in a way she'd never felt before. Every step was a gamble, but Ember stuck close, the chain dangling loose between them. By the time they reached the old train yard, both Clara and Ember were shaking. The abandoned cars offered a strange kind of shelter, not warm, but hidden, with enough space for Ember to stand and enough shadows for Clara to disappear. She found a heavy tarp among the junk and strung it up between two cars, creating a makeshift lean-to. Ember stood close as she spread her blanket out, stamping his feet and nuzzling her shoulder. That first night, away from the alley, Clara slept with one hand resting on Ember's shoulder, her other curled beneath her chin. She woke up every hour, afraid he'd vanish, but each time she opened her eyes, the horse was there, standing over her, watching, guarding. The sounds of the city faded, no more shouts, no more chains clinking, just the soft thud of hooves on frozen earth and the occasional snort as Ember shook the snow from his mane. Over the next few days, a new routine emerged. Clara scavenged for food during daylight, weaving through the city with Ember at her side like a living shadow. Sometimes people stopped and stared or took out their phones to snap pictures. A few offered scraps or coins, wide-eyed at the sight of a girl and a horse weaving through the slush. At night, they returned to the train yard, sheltering beneath the tarp. Ember seemed to grow stronger, his coat shinier, his eyes less wild. Some nights Clara played her battered harmonica, the soft notes floating through the cold air. Ember listened, ears twitching, breath steaming in rhythm with the music. It felt like magic, a tiny patch of warmth and hope against the icy dark. But there was always the threat of being found out. The owner, the cops, or just someone with too many questions. Still, Clara clung to the one thing she knew for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. In Ember, once just a shadow in the snow, had become her anchor. Wherever she went, he followed, two lost souls moving through the city together. There are routines people fall into for survival, and then there are routines built from something gentler. Something like trust. For Clara, each day's rhythm became a blend of both. The train yard was still cold, and the tarp barely held out the wind, but it was theirs. Each sunrise, she'd wake to the soft wicker of Ember shifting his weight, shaking frost from his mane. Some mornings, her fingers were so stiff with cold that she struggled to unroll herself from her blanket, but Ember would always be there, watching her with those deep, knowing eyes. Getting by in Portland was an art. Clara learned quickly that nobody looked twice at a girl with a harmonica on a busy corner, not until she started playing. The battered instrument had been with her since her earliest days, bouncing between foster homes. A rare possession she'd never let go. She'd set herself up near gas stations, markets, anywhere with foot traffic. Her tunes were simple, sometimes joyful, sometimes blue, echoing through the city's cracks. She played for coins, nickels, dimes, the occasional crumpled dollar. It wasn't much, but every cent mattered. With whatever she managed to collect, Clara bought apples and oats at the little market. She became a regular, the cashiers barely glancing at her anymore, assuming she was running errands for someone else. In truth, every purchase was for Ember. She rationed out the apples, slicing them carefully, making each bite last. Sometimes she'd find old bread at the back door of the bakery, or a wilted carrot that nobody else wanted. Nothing went to waste. Ember began to change. A gone was the shaking, starved creature she'd first found in the alley. Day by day, his coat grew glossier, his head higher. He started to respond not just to her presence, but to her words. Clara learned to speak to him softly, guiding him with her voice. At first, she'd just murmur nonsense, old song lyrics, stories she remembered from when she was younger. But as days passed, Ember started responding, lowering his head when she spoke in that gentle tone, pressing his nose into her palm. Sometimes, when she needed him to move, all it took was a steady breath, a single word. The city around them became their training ground. She'd lead him through alleys, across empty lots, down narrow back streets, where nobody would question a strange pair like them. Their silent partnership grew. Ember began anticipating her moves, sometimes even stepping between her and anyone who got too close. She learned to watch the tilt of his ears, the tension in his muscles. Once, while playing her harmonica for change outside a gas station, a man tried to grab her sleeve, maybe looking for trouble, maybe just angry at the world. Before Clara could react, Ember let out a deep, warning snort, eyes blazing. The man backed off fast, muttering about crazy kids and wild animals. Clara's heart hammered, but she grinned at Ember, grateful for his silent protection. But not everyone was welcoming. As winter dragged on, people started to notice. At first, it was curiosity, a few photos snapped by teenagers, a little kid pointing from a car window, a store clerk peering out at the pair. But soon, the whispers turned less friendly. "It's not safe." "Where'd she get a horse?" someone ought to call. Animal control. Clara tried to keep to the shadows, moving at dawn and dusk, but rumors spread. Even the train yard, abandoned as it was, didn't feel as invisible as before. A city can be generous when it wants, but it's quicker to judge, especially when something doesn't fit. One evening, Clara returned to the train yard with her usual haul. A couple bruised apples and a handful of oats. She found a group of boys, maybe a year or two older than her, poking around near Ember. Their laughter drifted through the air, sharp and mean. One was swinging a stick, another throwing rocks at a rusted oil drum nearby. Clara's gut clenched. "Hey!" she shouted, trying to keep her voice steady. The boys turned, eyes cold. "What's it to you?" one sneered, stepping closer to Ember, stick in hand. "That's my horse," Clara said, planting her feet, hands clenched tight. Ember watched her, muscles tense. The biggest boy grinned, flicking his stick. "Looks more like a bag of bones. We're just having some fun." "Leave him alone." Clara's voice cracked, but she didn't back down. Another boy laughed. "You're not the boss out here." He reached out, jabbing Ember's side. Ember flinched, but stood his ground. "Don't," Clara warned, voice trembling with anger. The biggest boy scowled. "What are you gonna do? Call the cops?" He shoved Clara hard. She stumbled, landing hard in the slush. Suddenly, Ember reared, hooves flashing in the air, eyes wild. The boys yelped and scattered, stumbling over themselves to get away. Ember landed hard, snorting, his body blocking Clara from the boys. The alley echoed with shouts and the clatter of feet on pavement as the group retreated. Clara stayed on the ground, heart racing, as Ember lowered his head and nudged her shoulder gently. Okay, she whispered, blinking back tears. She hugged his neck, feeling the heat of his body against the chill. After that, she started moving Ember around more often, never staying in one place too long. Some nights they slept beneath the old overpass, others tucked behind dumpsters or behind warehouses. And sometimes the only thing that let her sleep was the steady sound of Ember's breathing. In the darkest hours, when the city was still, she'd whisper to him, fears, memories, hopes she barely admitted to herself. But their little world was changing. Clara felt it in the way people watched them, the way the streets felt tighter, more suspicious. She wondered how much longer they could keep going like this. The city was full of dangers, and for every kind stranger there seemed to be two ready to make life harder. Still, Clara clung to her routine. Harmonica by day, scavenging by night, always with Ember by her side. It was a hard life, but at least it was theirs. At least, for now, they had each other. A girl nobody wanted, and a horse nobody claimed. Both. Holding on with everything they had. There are some nights in the city when the cold feels heavier, so thick it seems to press in through the layers of clothing, seeping straight to the bone. On one of those nights, Clara lay beneath a battered old tarp, trying to lose herself in the slow, rhythmic sound of Ember's breathing. The train yard had been a refuge for a few days, but now it felt exposed. Something in the air made Clara uneasy, a tension that wouldn't let her sleep, no matter how she tried to push it away. She reached out, her hand brushing Ember's flank. He shifted, standing so close that his breath fogged the space above her face. She whispered, "It's just us, boy. Just us against the world." But in her chest, doubt twisted and coiled. How much longer could they go unnoticed? How much longer until the city caught up to them? The next day, she was more careful than ever. She scouted her usual spots for food with Ember trailing her, but there were more eyes on them than usual. A shopkeeper shaking her head, a group of kids pointing and snickering, a woman on her phone glancing their way. By late afternoon, with clouds pressing low and snow swirling again, Clara felt the world closing in. She led Ember down a narrow alley beside a shuttered pawnshop, hoping to avoid attention. The brick walls were damp and stained, lined with garbage bins. She was halfway through the alley when she heard the sound, voices low and laughing. Instinct screamed for her to turn back, but it was too late. 4 boys blocked the way out. They looked older, bigger, their faces flushed with cold and a kind of wild, bored energy that made Clara's stomach knot. She recognized 2 of them from before, the ones who'd hassled her at the train yard. "Well, look what we got here," the tallest said, swinging a stick against his palm. "It's the horse girl and her ugly mutt." Clara tightened her grip on Ember's lead, standing straighter. "We're not looking for trouble." Another boy, red hair sticking out under his beanie, snorted. "Too late for that. Word is, you've been squatting on our turf. People are pissed, you know." Ember shifted, nostrils flaring. Clara kept her voice even. "We'll leave. You don't have to do anything." The first boy grinned. "Oh, we're just having some fun." He took a step closer, eyes mean. The others fanned out, forming a loose circle. Clara's pulse hammered in her ears. "Just let us go," she said, her tone shaking. A third boy jabbed a finger at Ember's side. "Bet you think you're special, bringing a horse around like you own the place. You some kind of freak?" Clara felt Ember tense, his muscles bunching under her hand. "Leave him alone," she said, sharper now. But they didn't stop. The boy with the stick raised it, brandishing it like a sword. "What'll you do if I don't?" Before Clara could answer, he swung the stick, aiming for Ember's shoulder. The sound of wood meeting bone rang out, sharp, ugly. Ember reared up, letting out a scream that echoed off the brick walls. Clara stumbled back, caught between trying to calm Ember and shield herself from the boys. "Whoa, he's wild," the red-haired boy laughed, backing away as Ember's hooves struck sparks off the pavement. Clara threw herself in front of Ember, arms wide. "Back off," she shouted, voice cracking. One of the boys lunged, grabbing at her arm, twisting it behind her. She yelped in pain, knees buckling. "Stop!" she cried, but the words fell flat in the alley. Ember, seeing Clara in distress, bellowed and surged forward. The circle broke. 2 boys tripped and fell in the snow. The leader dropped his stick, eyes wide now. "He's crazy. Let's get out of here." In the chaos, Clara pulled free, scrambling to her feet. Ember circled, head high, snorting like a wild thing. The boys retreated, cursing and jeering, but none dared get close. The stick was left on the ground, forgotten. Suddenly, a beam of light flooded the alley, harsh and bright, pinning them in place. Clara squinted, one hand shielding her eyes. A figure stepped forward, silhouetted against the glare. A woman's voice rang out, firm and controlled. "Step away, now!" The boys froze. The woman strode closer, the beam of her flashlight steady. She wore a heavy coat and a faded ball cap, her face lined but sharp-eyed. "I said, move." The boys glanced at each other, then at the horse and girl. For a moment, Clara feared they'd fight back, but the woman's presence, calm but unyielding, seemed to sap the fight from them. The leader spat into the snow. "Whatever. Freaks." The group melted into the dark, their bravado dissolving with distance. The woman lowered her flashlight, letting the beam fall to the ground. Clara could see her clearly now. Late 60s, sturdy, the sort of person who'd seen more than most and didn't scare easy. Her eyes swept over Ember, then rested on Clara. "You okay?" she asked, voice gentle but carrying an edge of command. Clara nodded shakily, rubbing her arm. "We're fine." "Thanks." The woman moved closer, looking Ember over with a practiced eye. "You sure?" she said quietly. "He's bleeding a bit." She pointed to a scrape on Ember's shoulder. Clara swallowed hard. They hit him." The woman nodded, sighing. "Kids like that. Always think hurting something weaker makes them strong." "Your horse did good, keeping you safe?" Clara managed a weak smile. "He always does." The woman extended a gloved hand. "Dorothy Bell? I used to be with the mounted police. Saw a lot of trouble like this in my day." Clara hesitated, then shook her hand. "Clara." Dorothy crouched beside Ember, talking softly as she checked the wound. "Not too deep. You got a name, big fella?" She looked at Clara. "Ember," Clara said, finding her voice. Dorothy smiled, gentle lines creasing her face. "Strong name. He's lucky you found him." A silence fell, heavy with everything unsaid. The fear, the adrenaline, the relief. Ember relaxed a little, his breathing evening out as Dorothy scratched his neck. Dorothy looked up, studying Clara. "You two got somewhere safe to stay?" Clara hesitated, eyes darting to the alley's shadows. "We move around, don't really have anywhere." Dorothy nodded, as if she'd expected that. "Well, for tonight, you do. Come on. Wait, you can't sleep out here. Too cold, too dangerous." She straightened up, giving Clara a look that left no room for argument. Clara glanced at Ember, then at Dorothy, hope and suspicion warring inside her. She had learned not to trust easily. But as Ember nuzzled her side, as Dorothy waited patiently, something inside her softened. A sense that maybe, just maybe, trouble had finally found them for a reason. She nodded. "Okay, we'll come." Dorothy's eyes warmed. "Good. Let's get you both somewhere warm. You've done enough surviving. It's time to rest." As they stepped out of the alley, Ember's head brushing her shoulder, Clara realized for the first time in a long while that maybe she wasn't alone in this fight after all. Dorothy led Clara and Ember out of the alley, her boots crunching over the fresh dusting of snow. The old train yard faded behind them as they followed Dorothy through silent streets, past glowing windows and flickering neon signs. Ember stayed close, his steps slow but sure, as if he understood this woman was someone to trust. Clara kept her hand on his neck, every muscle in her body tense, not sure what would happen next. They stopped beside an old green pickup parked near the curb. It looked sturdy, the kind of truck that had seen 100 winters and didn't mind another. Dorothy unlocked the passenger door and gestured for Clara to get in. Ember hesitated, pawing at the sidewalk, nostrils flaring in the cold night air. Dorothy knelt down beside him, her hands steady as she stroked his muzzle. "Easy now, big guy. No one's gonna hurt you. Let's take a look at you." She ran her fingers along Ember's neck, then brushed back the thick black mane, revealing a faint scar shaped like a letter. Clara leaned in, heart skipping. "What's that?" she asked. Dorothy squinted, tracing the brand with her thumb. "He's marked. See this? That's a patrol horse's brand. I know it anywhere. He was city property once. Probably used for police patrols, downtown, crowd control, parades, you name it." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "But he's just been left here? Alone?" Dorothy nodded, face darkening. Some get retired, sent to rescues, or adopted out. But every so often, one goes missing, sold off cheap, or just forgotten. She sighed, shaking her head. I remember hearing about a horse that went missing a couple winters back. They called him Cole then. It was in all the mounted unit memos. Folks cared about him. His name's Ember now, Clara said fiercely, surprising herself. Dorothy smiled gently. Looks like he's got someone who cares. Again. She straightened, glancing between Clara and the horse. I'm heading out to Sage Ridge Rescue tonight. That's my place. 20 acres just outside the city. A warm barn, fresh water, feed. You both look like you could use some rest. Clara's chest tightened. She'd learned to distrust offers, to brace for disappointment. You mean, you'll take him? Her voice cracked, the question sharper than she meant. Dorothy's eyes softened. Only if he wants to come? Looks like he already did. She nodded at Ember, who pressed his head against Clara's arm. It's up to you, kid. But if you want real shelter, real food, both of you are welcome. I don't split up families, not even found ones. Clara hesitated. She looked at Ember, saw the trust in his tired eyes, and realized she had to take the chance, for his sake and maybe for hers. All right, she whispered, her decision shaking in the cold air. We'll come, Dorothy smiled. Good, I'll load him in that back. You ride up front with me, don't worry, I've got a soft spot for hitchhikers. 2-legged and 4. It took some coaxing to get Ember into the truck's stock bed. Dorothy moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd handled horses her whole life. She laid down a heavy blanket, offered Ember a bucket of water, and secured the makeshift gate. Ember hesitated for just a second, then stepped up, trusting Dorothy and Clara alike. Inside the truck's cab, Clara shivered as warmth seeped into her bones. She cradled her hands together, feeling the sting of warmth after so many days in the cold. Dorothy handed her a faded thermos. Hot chocolate? Drink up. Clara sipped, the sweetness shocking after weeks of watery soup and scavenged bread. She glanced back through the frosted rear window, watching Ember shift and settle under the moonlight. He's never been in a truck before, she murmured. He'll be all right, Dorothy said, starting the engine. He knows you're near. She looked over, her voice gentler now. How long's it been, Clara, since you had somewhere to stay? Clara hesitated, staring at her shoes. A while. I was in the system. Last foster home didn't work out. Nobody came looking after that. She forced herself to shrug, like it didn't matter. Dorothy's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That's a hard road, honey, but it doesn't have to stay that way. The truck rumbled through the city's outskirts, snowflakes swirling in the headlights. As they reached the edge of Portland, city lights faded, replaced by the hush of open land and the dark shapes of pines. Clara felt her eyes drooping, exhaustion catching up with her. Still, she fought to stay awake, afraid this safety would vanish if she closed her eyes. Dorothy's voice cut through the darkness. You can sleep, you know. I'll wake you when we get there. Clara nodded, but she watched the night roll by. Icy fields, the glow of distant farmhouses, the rising promise of shelter. At last, Dorothy turned onto a gravel drive flanked by a wooden sign. Sage Ridge Rescue. The truck's headlights caught the red barn, its doors wide open, golden lights spilling out onto the snow. The world felt softer here. Dorothy parked and came around to help Clara out. She moved to the back, lowering the ramp and murmuring soft encouragements as Ember stepped down. The barn's heat and scent, hay, clean straw, the breath of other horses, wrapped around them. Ember pricked his ears, suddenly alert but calm. Clara followed Dorothy through the barn, passing stalls filled with curious faces. Old geldings, retired mares, a donkey that brayed softly in welcome. Dorothy pointed to an empty stall lined with fresh straw. This is all yours tonight, Ember, and for as many nights as you want. Ember walked in, turning in a slow circle before settling with a long sigh. Dorothy smiled at Clara. You, young lady, get the cot right outside his stall. I don't separate partners. Clara's heart swelled with relief and gratitude she barely knew how to express. She stroked Ember's neck as he lowered his head to her shoulder, breathing deep. "We made it, boy," she whispered. "We really did." Dorothy left them to settle, but not before bringing extra blankets and a mug of soup. "Rest, both of you. Tomorrow's a new day." As the barn quieted, Clara sat with Ember's head in her lap, listening to his steady breaths. For the first time in what felt like forever, she believed in a tomorrow that wasn't just about surviving. For the first time, someone had opened a door, for her and for Ember both. She drifted into sleep beneath the soft barn lights, Ember standing guard. Somewhere in her dreams, Clara heard Dorothy's words echo. "Looks like he already did." For the first time in a long time, hope felt real. Clara woke to a stillness she'd never known, a quiet so deep it felt like a blanket. At first, she didn't know where she was. For a heartbeat, panic clawed at her chest. Had she let down her guard, lost her horse, missed some warning sign that trouble was near? Then she remembered the softness of the barn light, the clean scent of straw, the warmth of Ember's body pressed close through the slats of his stall. She sat up slowly on the cot Dorothy had dragged in for her, feeling every acorn and bruise from the alley, but something inside her felt different. Safe. Was this what it was supposed to be like? Not having to listen for every sound in the dark? Ember stood just a few feet away, his long black neck stretched through the bars. He watched Clara with the same calm intensity he always had. But this time, his eyes looked softer. She reached out, pressing her hand to his muzzle. He blew warm air across her fingers, snuffling her palm as if to say, "Still here, still together." Outside the barn, horses nickered and stamped as Dorothy moved up and down the aisle, checking stalls, offering quiet encouragements to the herd. There was a sense of order, of routine. It was nothing like the chaos of the streets or the restless uncertainty of moving from alley to alley. The clatter of feed buckets, the steady thump of hay bales being stacked, even the barn cats weaving between the horses' hooves. It all felt like another world. Dorothy appeared in front of Clara's stall, smiling kindly. "Mornin', sleepyhead. How's your boy?" Clara tried to answer, but emotion caught in her throat. She looked at Ember, then back at Dorothy. He's good. I think he likes it here." Dorothy nodded. "He's got spirit, that one. Give him a few weeks and you won't recognize him." She slid a tray of warm oatmeal and a mug of coffee through the stall's half door. "Eat? Then you can help me with chores if you want. There's always plenty to do around here." Clara ate quickly, unused to food that was hot and filling. She watched Ember devour his grain, eyes closing in pleasure as he munched contentedly. When she finished, she followed Dorothy down the aisle, helping with water buckets, sweeping up loose straw, and fetching brushes from the tack room. She worked quietly at first, her movements stiff and self-conscious, but soon found herself settling into the rhythm of the place. The rescue was different from anything she'd ever known. There were rules, but they weren't sharp or cruel. If she made a mistake, spilling water, dropping a pitchfork, Dorothy just chuckled and showed her again. There was no yelling, no threats, just patience. Other volunteers came and went, greeting her with easy smiles. A few tried to make small talk, but Clara kept her answers short. She didn't want to explain herself, or Ember. She wasn't ready for that. The day slipped by in slow, gentle hours. Clara watched as Ember was examined by a visiting vet, an older woman with kind eyes and steady hands. She cleaned Ember's wounds, checked his hooves, and ran her hands down his thin legs. Clara hovered nearby, nerves stretched tight, but the vet worked carefully, explaining each step. He's tougher than he looks," the vet said, rubbing Ember's neck. "Lucky for him, he's got someone who cares. You did good." Clara flushed with pride she didn't know she could still feel. When the exam was over, Dorothy handed her a brush and a curry comb. "Take your time. Grooming helps him, and you." Clara worked the brush through Ember's tangled mane, humming softly. The barn was quiet except for the horses breathing and the distant sound of wind outside. For the first time, She felt the stress begin to drain from her shoulders. It was strange, after so long fighting for every scrap, every minute of peace, to have nothing to fear, if only for a little while. When evening fell, Dorothy offered Clara a bed in the house. Clara shook her head. "I want to stay with Ember." Dorothy didn't push, just set a blanket and pillow beside the stall. Clara curled up on the cot, hand reaching through the bars to rest on Ember's shoulder. She listened to him munching hay, the slow, steady rhythm grounding her in a way she'd never known. Sleep tugged at her, heavy and insistent, but she fought it back for a moment. She whispered, "Maybe we're not broken, just bent." The words floated up into the shadows, hanging there like a promise. Ember leaned into her hand, his breath soft on her arm. He didn't move away. He didn't need to. Night crept in, the barn falling quiet as the last chores ended, and the other horses settled for the night. Clara stayed just where she was, her hand still resting on Ember. She felt the steady thump of his heartbeat, the warmth of his body radiating through the bars. For so long, safety had meant hiding, waiting for danger to pass. Now it meant something different. Connection, a warm stall, a kind hand. Clara let herself believe, just for tonight, that it might last. She drifted into dreams of snowy fields, of horses running free, of a world where kindness was as natural as breathing. When she woke, Ember was still there, his eyes watching her with patient trust. "Maybe we're not broken," she thought again, settling deeper into her cot. "Just bent. And bent things could be straightened, given enough time and care." Outside the world spun on, sharp and cold and indifferent. But inside the barn, Clara and Ember had found a space, all their own. A small, fragile peace, lit by hope. Morning at Sage Ridge Rescue began before the sun climbed the sky. Roosters crowed out by the fence posts, their calls echoing through the cold blue haze. Clara woke in the soft light filtering through the barn's high windows, hands still pressed against Ember's warm shoulder, as if neither of them could bear to let go. She lay there for a moment, watching her breath curl up into the rafters, feeling a calm she'd never known back in the city. She sat up and listened to the easy rhythms of the rescue coming alive, horses nickering for breakfast, the shuffle of boots on the concrete aisle, and Dorothy's familiar humming as she loaded bales of hay onto a wheelbarrow. There was work to be done, and for once, Clara found herself wanting to do it. Dorothy greeted her with a smile and a cup of hot tea. "Ready to get your hands dirty?" Clara grinned, nodding. "Always." She brushed hay from her hair and pulled on the worn pair of gloves Dorothy had found for her. Just a little too big, but warm and soft. She helped muck stalls, refill water buckets, and measure out grain, learning to read the quirks of each horse. One liked her ears scratched, another snatched at sleeves. One mare only ate if you stood beside her. Dorothy moved around her, guiding but never hovering, always trusting Clara to try and figure things out for herself. Soon, Clara became Dorothy's right hand. She learned to brush tangled manes without getting kicked, to check hooves for stones, to feel the pulse of a horse's health just by laying a hand on its neck. She watched Dorothy wrap a bandage around a gelding's swollen leg, mix up herbal feed for a coughing mare, and smooth a panicked colt's mane until he fell asleep. The rescue's routines felt natural, each day unfolding in a way that soothed the constant anxiety Clara had carried for so long. And then there was Ember. Under Dorothy's care, he gained weight, his coat growing glossy, his eyes alert but calm. He settled into his stall like he'd been born there, but Clara noticed he always watched the barn door, as if he wanted to make sure Clara was nearby. Even when she left his side for chores, she'd catch his gaze, tracking her, steady and reassuring. As the days slid by, Ember started showing something none of them expected: leadership. The first sign was subtle: a newly rescued filly, skittish and wild, refusing to eat or let anyone close. Dorothy had warned Clara to keep her distance. She's scared of her own shadow. But one afternoon, when Clara was brushing Ember out in the paddock, the filly edged closer, drawn by Ember's calm presence. Ember didn't chase her off or pin his ears. He simply stood, breathing steady, eyes half closed, a silent anchor in the storm. Clara watched in awe as the filly stretched her neck and sniffed Ember's shoulder, trembling. Ember stayed perfectly still, letting her investigate, offering nothing but patience. After a long while, the filly relaxed, and for the first time since arriving, she nibbled at the hay beside Ember. That evening, Dorothy watched from the barn doorway, arms folded, a rare smile touching her lips. "That's the kind of trust you can't teach," she murmured to Clara. "Some horses, just like some people, got it in their bones. They make others feel safe." Word spread quickly around the rescue about Ember's calming effect. Whenever new arrivals came, scared, injured, or angry, Dorothy would often bring them near Ember's stall, letting him set the tone. It was like he had an invisible rope, gently pulling the others back from panic, teaching them by example how to breathe, how to trust. Volunteers started calling him the barn's heartbeat. One afternoon, while the winter sun was melting the last traces of frost from the fence rails, Clara was helping a volunteer named Alex introduce a rescued mare to the main paddock. The mare was tense. Nostrils flared, whites of her eyes showing. Clara's job was just to hold the gate, but when the mare spooked at a sudden noise, a dog barking far off, she lunged, her teeth flashing dangerously close to Alex's arm. Alex stumbled, dropping the lead rope, and panic shot through the air like electricity. Without thinking, Clara stepped forward, raising her hands but not shouting, her voice steady. "Easy, girl. Hey, easy now." At that moment, Ember walked to the fence, pressed his nose through the slats, and stood as close as he could. The mare turned, her wild eyes locking on Ember, then slowly settled, her muscles uncoiling. Clara reached out, moving slowly, and stroked her trembling neck. Alex exhaled in relief. "How'd you do that?" Clara looked at Ember. "It wasn't me. It was him. I just listened." Later, Dorothy clapped her on the shoulder. "You're a natural, Clara. Not many folks know when to talk and when to just be quiet. That mare needed silence and a little leadership. Ember showed you how." Clara flushed with pride. She realized, maybe for the first time, that she was changing. Not just surviving, but growing, learning, becoming someone she barely recognized but was starting to like. In the quiet moments before evening chores, Clara liked to sit on the hay bales outside Ember's stall, watching the rescue's routines winding down. The barn cats would curl around her feet, Ember would doze, and sometimes Dorothy would join her, sipping coffee and sharing stories about her days in the mounted police, riding into protests, breaking up fights, coaxing frightened horses through crowds. Sometimes, Dorothy's stories were sad, about horses that never got a second chance, or kids who slipped through the cracks. But Clara found strength in knowing Ember, and she had escaped that fate, and that maybe, here, they could help others do the same. That night, as snow fell soft and silent outside the barn, Clara lay on her cot, Ember standing close as always. She thought about the filly, about the mare, about the small ripples of change Ember had brought just by being himself. She reached through the bars, fingers twining in his mane. "You're not just my hero anymore," she whispered. "You're theirs too." Ember leaned into her hand, steady as ever. And for the first time, Clara didn't just feel safe. She felt needed, part of something bigger than herself, something good. She closed her eyes, letting that feeling carry her into sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges and new chances to lead, quietly, just like Ember. Well, the sun had begun to climb higher and longer in the sky, melting away much of the winter gloom. But at Sage Ridge Rescue, Clara's days continued to move with quiet purpose. She was used to keeping her head down, blending into the background, her words reserved for Ember or Dorothy alone. Even among the other volunteers, Clara's voice was a rare sound. She answered questions, yes, but never offered stories. Most of her life, she'd learned that being invisible was safer. All that began to shift the morning Dorothy approached her in the barn with an unusual look. A gleam in her eye that meant she was up to something. Clara was brushing Ember, the familiar rhythm calming them both, when Dorothy cleared her throat. "There's a reporter from Channel 9 coming by later today," Dorothy said, her tone careful but bright. "They want to do a story on Ember, And you. Clara froze, brush in midair. Me? Why? I'm nobody. Dorothy smiled gently. You're not nobody to Ember, or to me, or to any of these horses. The way you two found each other, survived together, helped the others. Folks could use a little hope right now. That's what your story gives them. Clara's stomach twisted. She had never liked cameras. She thought of all the things she didn't want people to see. The way her voice sometimes shook. The scars on her knuckles, the shadows under her eyes. I don't know what I'd even say, she mumbled, hiding behind Ember's neck. Just speak your truth, Dorothy said quietly, and talk about the things that matter to you and to the horses. Don't worry about sounding fancy. The news crew arrived that afternoon, a young woman with a bright smile and a cameraman with friendly eyes. They set up outside Ember's stall, the light bouncing off his sleek black coat. Clara stood off to the side, trying not to wring her hands, feeling the familiar urge to run. Ember, by contrast, was calm as ever, nosing at her shoulder and letting the reporter stroke his nose. They started with Dorothy, who told the story of Ember's police past, how he'd vanished from the city's mounted unit, then turned up starved and chained behind a feed store. Then, gently, the reporter turned her attention to Clara. How did you two meet? She asked. Clara's voice trembled as she answered. He was alone. Cold. I guess we both were. I just couldn't leave him. She tried to keep her answers short, but the reporter pressed, kindly but firmly, asking about life on the streets, the challenges she and Ember had faced, the way things changed at Sage Ridge. At first, Clara's answers came out small, tight with nerves. But as the questions went on, something shifted inside her. She realized she wasn't talking to a camera. She was talking to people, maybe kids out there, who felt the way she'd felt, or people who'd never heard what it was really like to be unseen, hungry, scared. She began to talk more openly. People always say you can't save everyone, she said, looking straight at the camera. But sometimes all it takes is one person, one chance, to change everything. Ember changed my life, and Dorothy. This place, it gave us both a second chance. That's all some of us need, just one. The reporter asked if there was anything Clara wanted people to know about the foster system, or about kids who fall through the cracks. Clara's heart thudded, but she forced herself to keep going. It's not just about being fed or having a roof. It's about having someone believe you matter. The system's full of rules and numbers, but what matters is people. If you see someone hurting or scared or just lost, be kind. That can save a life. It saved mine. The interview ended, but Clara's words lingered in the quiet barn. The news crew thanked her and left, promising the story would air that week. Dorothy squeezed her shoulder, proud but not overbearing. You did good, kid. Real good. Clara tried to shrug it off, but a strange feeling fluttered in her chest. Something like pride, something like hope. That night, she brushed Ember in the dim light, the barn quiet around them. I talked about hush us, she whispered, running her hand down his neck. I hope I did it right. A few days later, the segment aired. Clara didn't watch it live. She was too nervous. But the next morning, Dorothy found her in the paddock, eyes wide. You wouldn't believe it if I told you. People have been calling, writing letters, sending donations. I've never seen anything like it. Clara stared. Really? Dorothy nodded. You struck a nerve, Clara. People want to help. Some want to visit. Others want to know how they can foster, how they can adopt, how they can give back. You open their eyes. All at once, the rescue was filled with new energy. Volunteers came by, drawn by the story they'd seen. A group of local school kids sent hand-painted cards and a stack of carrot muffins. One woman from across the state donated enough hay to last the rescue through the next winter. A nearby veterinarian offered to cover the costs of medical care for the horses who needed it most. At first, All the attention overwhelmed Clara. She wasn't used to being seen, to having her words ripple outward like stones in a pond. But Dorothy helped her navigate the letters and phone calls, and Clara found herself writing thank you notes late into the night. Sometimes she'd cry quietly in the hayloft, not because she was sad, but because she was amazed at the idea that her voice, once so small and hidden, could reach people she'd never met. Through it all, she kept her routines, brushing Ember at night, humming softly as she worked, grounding herself in the quiet strength of their bond. No matter how many people wanted their attention, she always made time for Ember, the one who'd listened to her first. One evening, Clara sat in the paddock as dusk settled, letters and cards stacked beside her. Ember lowered his head, snuffling her hair, and she laughed. "You're the real star, you know. I just told them what you did for me." She looked up at the wide sky, feeling its hugeness but not fearing it. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe we really are part of something bigger." The world beyond Sage Ridge was still full of challenges. She knew that. But now Clara understood that her voice, no matter how scared or shaky, had power. And with Ember and Dorothy by her side, she finally wanted to use it. For herself, and for every lost kid or lonely horse who just needed a little hope. The rescue barn glowed with the soft light of late afternoon, dust motes swirling in the golden haze. It had been weeks since Clara's story aired, and Sage Ridge was livelier than ever. Some days Clara hardly recognized herself in this new life. Helping Dorothy manage volunteers, greeting new visitors with shy but genuine smiles, answering questions about Ember and the other horses. But beneath the cheerful bustle, she never forgot what it had cost to get here. The hunger, the fear, the nights spent wishing for one kind word or gesture. That memory shaped everything she did. One cold morning, a battered old trailer rattled up the drive, engine coughing before it cut out. Clara was sweeping the aisle when she heard it, and she set her broom aside as Dorothy stepped out to meet the driver. A woman in worn jeans and a fraying coat opened the trailer's door. From the shadows emerged a filthy, wild-eyed colt. His coat was patchy with mud and old wounds, ribs jutting sharp against his sides, mane tangled with burrs. The whites of his eyes showed as he bucked against the lee rope, terrified and angry. Clara watched Dorothy approach the woman quietly, exchanging hushed words and a few gentle nods. She heard only snatches. Found him on the edge of the highway. Owner's just up and left. Hasn't let anyone close in days. The woman passed the rope to Dorothy with a kind of exhausted relief, then melted back to her truck and drove off, as if afraid the colt's pain might cling to her. Clara moved slowly, keeping her hands at her sides, meeting the colt's wild gaze with steady calm. Dorothy's voice was low and soft. "He's all yours. Clara, think you and Ember could help him settle in?" Clara nodded, her heart squeezing at the memory of her first days at Sage Ridge. Frightened, exhausted, unsure if anyone truly wanted her to stay. She knew, looking at the colt's eyes, that he felt the same way. "Let's start with space," Clara murmured. She led the colt to an empty stall at the end of the barn, its walls freshly bedded with straw, and a blanket folded in the corner. She didn't try to touch him, didn't crowd him or shush his frantic pacing. Instead, she sat just outside the stall, knees hugged to her chest, and waited. Hours passed, marked by the routine sounds of the barn, the rattle of feed buckets, the soft lowing of horses, Dorothy's footsteps echoing down the aisle. Clara hummed softly, a tune she used to play on her harmonica for Ember during those desperate nights in the city. At first, the colt barely noticed. He spun circles, lashed his tail, flinched at every sound. But as dusk settled and the barn quieted, Clara saw Ember poke his head from his own stall. Ears pricked toward the newcomer. He stood still, breathing slow and deep. The colt watched him, tense but curious. Dorothy leaned against the doorframe, watching. "You two have a way with the ones who've been let down?" she said softly. Clara nodded. "I remember what it's like to be scared of everything. You want to run, but You also want someone to stay. Dorothy smiled, the lines at the corners of her eyes deepening. He'll come around. Sometimes it just takes a little longer. That night, Clara spread the old blanket in the corner of the colt's stall and left a bucket of clean water and a few apple slices nearby. She didn't force the colt to eat or drink, just sat in silence until her eyelids grew heavy. Ember, sensing her mood, stood close by, occasionally nickering softly. Before leaving, Clara whispered, that's how it started, remember? She looked at Ember, recalling their first fragile bond, a shivering night, an offered coat, a simple act of trust. In the days that followed, Clara visited the colt every morning and every evening, always alone at first. She read aloud to him from a tattered book she'd found in Dorothy's office, told stories about the other horses, and hummed the same lullabies she'd played for Ember. She never reached out. She just, waited, patient as the snowfall, letting the colt get used to her voice, her presence, her calm. Ember helped, too. Each afternoon, Clara brought Ember to graze near the colt's paddock. At first, the colt pinned his ears, bracing to bolt. But Ember was never in a hurry. He'd lower his head, nibbling at the grass, glancing up every so often with quiet curiosity. Slowly, the colt inched closer, drawn by the steady, unhurried confidence of this older horse who'd once been broken too. One evening, just as the sun slipped behind the hills, Clara noticed the colt was watching Ember more than her. Sensing the shift, she rose and left the stall gate open, sitting quietly nearby as Ember stood close. The barn was filled with golden light, dust swirling, everything hushed and expectant. For a long time the colt hesitated. Then, so slowly Clara barely dared to breathe. He stepped forward, stretching his neck toward Ember. Ember didn't move, didn't even look up. The colt sniffed his side, then pressed his nose against Ember's shoulder, the tiniest gesture of trust. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. The breakthrough was small, but everything changed after that. Each night, the colt came a little closer, drawn by Ember's patience, Clara's quiet presence, the slow rhythm of kindness that filled the barn. He began to eat the apple slices Clara left out, let her sit closer, even took a treat from her hand. One afternoon, as Clara was sweeping, she noticed the colt watching her every move. No longer wild with panic. He whickered softly. Clara approached, heart pounding, and reached out her hand. This time, he didn't bolt. He sniffed her fingers, and after a moment, nudged her palm, searching for another treat. Dorothy saw the moment from across the barn and smiled. You gave him what was given to you. That's how healing works, Clara. One lost soul helps another, and the world turns a little kinder. Clara didn't say anything. Her throat was too tight. But as she stroked the colt's mane, she thought of all the nights she'd spent terrified, all the moments she'd almost given up. And she realized she'd become what she once needed, a safe place, a patient friend, a second chance. That night, Clara sat in the barn long after everyone else had gone to bed, Ember standing on one side, the colt on the other. She watched them both, heart full, and whispered, "We're not just survivors anymore, are we? We're family, and there's always room for one more." In that quiet, golden space, Clara knew she was finally home. Not just safe, but able to give safety, too. She'd found her purpose, and her voice, and the courage to keep the circle of hope alive, one lost soul at a time. Snow had returned, blanketing Sage Ridge Rescue in soft white silence. Each breath of wind carried the memory of every storm Clara had ever weathered. Cold nights in doorways, hunger twisting in her belly, the silent ache of being unwanted. But now, as she stood at the barn door in a heavy, borrowed coat, all those memories felt distant, smoothed over by the present warmth of belonging. The rescue had changed, and so had she. Clara had become part of something that felt real and solid, a place where bruised hearts and battered bodies found shelter and time to mend. She could see it everywhere, in Dorothy's steady patience, in the way Ember stood as sentinel for every new arrival, in the slow transformation of even the wildest horses once given trust and space to breathe. On this particular morning, as the light glimmered off icy fences and the trees glittered with frost, Dorothy found Clara in the paddock, a gentle smile warming her face. "You ready?" she asked. Clara nodded, her fingers tightening around the rope in her hand. "He's ready," she said, glancing at Ember, who pawed the ground and shook his mane, eyes bright and eager. For weeks, Dorothy had encouraged her, and now Clara finally believed she could do it. Ride Ember bareback, just the two of them, no saddle, no fear. She'd come to understand what true trust meant, both given and received. Dorothy opened the gate. "Go on then, this is your morning." Clara led Ember out into the fresh snow, the world silent but for the soft thud of hooves and the gentle crunch beneath her boots. She placed her hand on his withers, feeling the warmth of him beneath all that sleek black fur, then swung herself up onto his back. He stood rock still as she settled her weight, finding her balance, feeling every breath and shift in his body. He waited for her cue, calm, patient, connected. She looked around, the paddocks, the red barn glowing against the snow, the soft trails leading into the woods where the rescue's land met the wild edge of the world. Clara inhaled deeply. "Ready, boy?" Ember stepped forward, slow at first, then more sure with each stride. They made their way out of the barnyard and onto the snowy trail Dorothy had mapped out for them, winding through bare trees and silent fields. The world was utterly quiet, except for the steady rhythm of Ember's breathing, the movement of his muscles beneath her, the crisp air stinging her cheeks. Riding bareback was a new kind of freedom. There was no barrier between them, no leather, no reins, just trust. Clara let her hands rest lightly in Ember's mane, leaning forward as he picked up a gentle trot. They moved together, a rider and horse, two survivors who'd found in each other not just comfort but purpose. As they rode, Clara's thoughts wandered back, her first night in the alley, shivering as she laid her coat over Ember's shaking body, the first time he'd followed her, loyal as a shadow, down a snowy sidewalk, the moments of fear and doubt and the unspoken promises exchanged in each shared breath. Every memory brought her deeper into the present, anchoring her to this place, this horse, this life she had fought so hard to claim. They reached the top of a small rise overlooking the rescue, and Clara brought Ember to a halt. She slid off his back, standing beside him as he lowered his head to nuzzle her shoulder, breath warm against her skin. She pressed her face into his mane, letting herself feel the fullness of the moment. "I gave you warmth when the world gave me cold," she whispered, repeating words she'd once only hoped were true. "You gave me grounding when I had none. And together, we made space for others." For a long moment, Clara stood there, hand resting on Ember's neck, feeling the stillness around her. She watched the rescue below, the red barn, the slow movement of horses in the paddocks, Dorothy waving from the porch, a group of volunteers leading the new colt out into the sun. It was a world built not on perfection, but on second chances, and Clara was proud to have a hand in shaping it. On the way back, Clara let Ember set the pace, trusting him as he had trusted her so many times before. When they returned to the barn, Dorothy was waiting with 2 mugs of hot cider. She handed one to Clara and squeezed her shoulder. "You did good, kid, both of you," Clara smiled. "He did all the work." Dorothy shook her head. "No, it's both of you. Together, that's the magic. That's what people need to see." Later that afternoon, as the sky grew thick with the promise of more snow, Clara found herself sitting in the hayloft, Ember's head resting in her lap. She thought about the letters still coming in, kids from the city writing about their own struggles, adults asking how they could help, strangers sending donations or offers to adopt or foster. The story she had been so afraid to tell had started something much bigger than herself. She realized that healing, real healing, wasn't just about being saved. It was about learning to give back, to hold out your hand to someone or some animal who needed what you'd once needed. It was about making space, keeping the ember burning, no matter how dark or cold the world outside became. As dusk settled, Clara walked through the barn, whispering good night to every horse. She paused by the colt's stall, the one who had once been too wild for touch. Now, he came to the gate, bumping her hand for treats, eyes soft and trusting. She smiled, thinking, that's how it started, remember? Before turning in for the night, Clara scrawled a few words in a notebook Dorothy had given her. If the story settled into your chest, let it settle somewhere else, too. Share it. Someone you know might still be waiting for their ember. She tucked the notebook away, feeling lighter. In a world that had taught her to expect little, she had found more than she'd ever dared to dream. A home, a family, and the courage to be a spark for someone else. As the snow fell, soft and silent, Clara knew the story wasn't ending. It was only just beginning. Underscore, 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 underscore.